Well, Auckland's in level 3 and we're in level 2 down here. And one of the things that happens when the COVID alert levels go up is everyone tries to get all their lawns mowed and everything. So while the mowers around us have just stopped for a little bit, and I think that dog stopped barking.
Dog stopped barking for a moment?
Yeah, let's try and get something in the can, shall we? So in the previous podcast we talked about the 10 micro parties. That's the ones that are polling under 1%. And then we're going to do an individual podcast for each of the other 8. Heather, how are we going to cover that?
Well, we thought what we should do is go into a bit of detail about each party. So if you don't know much about them, or you're thinking about who you're going to vote for, you go away feeling you know them better. We're going to do a very brief history of each party. We'll talk a little bit about where they sit on the political spectrum, but you can cast back to our previous podcast to get the detail around that. That's around the political spectrum. We'll look at the key people in the party, those that we feel you should know a bit about, and then the substance, what you can expect from the party in the election campaign, and then what you can expect from the party if they are in government after the 19th of September.
Great, I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie.
And I'm Heather Roy.
Alphabetically, who's up first? ACT.
Yes, we thought we should be fair about this and do parties in alphabetical order, so ACT New Zealand is the first party. And their slogan for this election is Change Your Future, Party Vote ACT. Quite a number of the parties seem to be talking about the future of this election.
2 or 3, yeah. Okay, and what's the history of them?
Well, ACT was formed in 1994, and really it's a party that came into being because of MMP. The 1994 formation was in preparation for that first MMP election.
If you've heard our earlier podcast on the political spectrum, you'll see that they are positioned in the upper right quadrant, which means they're a socially liberal free market party.
Correct.
Who's the key people?
The leader obviously is David Seymour. David's been in Parliament on his own for the last 2 terms. And I think this could well be his election. He's worked really hard on the euthanasia bill, which is now going to be a referendum at this election, and he's got actually quite a good lineup of people too. So number 2 on his list is a young woman called Brooke Van Velden. She has worked in the parliamentary office for the last 3 years. And number 3 is Nicole McKee, and for those people who have a keen interest in firearms, she has led the Colfo campaign for firearms most recently. Also a very impressive person.
And as a licensed firearm owner, I have to say they ran a really good, responsible campaign.
It was a great example of how a campaign should be run. On current polling, ACT is likely to get 5 or 6 MPs, so we probably should look at a couple of the others too. Chris Bailey from Nelson is number 4 on the party list. He is a former police officer, now a teacher. Number 5, Simon?
Simon Court. He's an engineer, and he's got a multitude of experiences overseas. He's keen on sustainability and environmental engineering, and fast cars and loud music apparently.
And number 6 is James McDowell, who is a lawyer from Waikato who has a keen interest in small business.
Yeah, one of the differences with ACT against some of the other smaller parties is that they have an electorate seat.
That's right, which means that whole dilemma of the wasted vote that we talked about in a previous podcast doesn't exist for them. If they're safe in their seat of Epsom, which David Seymour holds, then none of the party vote that goes to the ACT party is wasted.
And Judith Collins just come out explicitly and said she wants national voters to give ACT their electorate vote, and they
Epsom?
want that.
That's right.
Epsom,
Yep.
That's never happened before. There's always been these covert cups of tea signals,
That's right, so it's pretty clear that the National Party would like ACT there to have a presence in Parliament after the 19th of September.
And that's MMP. So
It is.
what can we expect from the ACT party if they're in government after 19 September or whenever this election might be held now?
Well, if you want to go to the ACT Party website, that's www.act.org.nz, their policy section is actually quite impressive, I have to say. They've got a very comprehensive set of policies. They look at the 5-point plan for economic recovery, and the impressive thing from my perspective about that is they're looking at the current COVID situation, but they're also looking to the longer term, so their focus isn't just on the here and now, and that's what I'd like to see for all of the parties. So we'll see if that is the case when we explore the other ones. But it's worth looking at their 5-point plan for economic recovery and the 5 key areas that they talk about there. So the first point in their 5-point plan for economic recovery is about getting Kiwis back to work, and that looks at things like the 90-day trials back for all businesses and a 3-year moratorium on minimum wage increases. So that is covering the economic downturn that we've already experienced, but are thinking will be much more severe.
Yeah, and moving on with the economic side of it, the balancing of the books, their intent is to return to surplus by 2024 and begin repaying the debt that's been raised in terms of the COVID response. Part of their plan for that, they've identified $7.6 billion in wasteful spending, and I think that covers things like fees for education, no interest on student loans if you stay in the country, and things like that. And tax cuts, $3.1 billion in tax cuts, reducing, this is interesting, reducing the tax rate, the 30% tax rate to 17.5%, which instantly puts
from
money,
30 currently.
Yeah, that puts money into people's pockets in the order of sort of 5 or 6K. And on their website, it actually sort of projects how much, if you're earning this much, what that means in terms of cash in the pocket. Interestingly, again, they're proposing to cut GST to 10% for 12 months, and that's a big boost for people.
That's right, and that's completely user pays element, so those people at the lower end of the socio-economic spectrum would benefit from that too. They move into familiar territory for ACT people is cutting red tape, and so the two things that they've highlighted there is repealing the Zero Carbon Act, been quite vocal about that in the last term, and the ban on oil and gas exploration would go under an ACT government, and I think that sits nicely with their potential coalition partner of National.
Yeah, and unsurprising regulatory reform stuff, making it easier for investors from OECD countries to invest here, and limiting government's ability to pass harmful regulation. I'd have to dig deeper into that to really understand how they intend to do that. Building for the future, RMA, well, I think it's well known that the RMA is not fit for purpose. They're also talking about amending the Building Act though.
That's right, and developing a new infrastructure corporation.
This is interesting. That would put an end, as they say, to politically motivated infrastructure building. There wouldn't have been so many announcements in the last few weeks.
That's right. And then the last point, the fifth point in this economic recovery plan, is protecting public health, and that really is focusing on the COVID situation, but from a health perspective, which is good to see.
Yeah, for doubling customs funding at the border temporarily so that they can get it open quicker, and setting up a national public health service to regard to epidemic responses. We've long talked about a national security agency which would look at these sorts of things, so maybe that fits within that model.
That's right. PPE expansion, given the moving back into alert levels again, that's an important area, and adding a human health aspect to the border provisions.
Great. What's next?
I think there's other things that people who have traditionally been attracted to ACT for are also there in their very thorough policy document. There's some talk about the small to medium businesses, there's provisional tax options there, for example. They also delve into the welfare space as they traditionally have, and some interesting law and order provisions as well. One of the things that ACT has talked about but have got much more of a focus on this election, arms legislation. Do you want to cover that off, Simon?
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that Nicole McKee is number 3 on the list. I think when they're openly planning to repeal, if they're in government, plan the new legislation that was recently passed, the Arms Legislation Act, which has a whole lot of problems in it from the perspective of licensed firearms owners. They're talking about a new Arms Act as well as repealing that piece of legislation, and no register of firearms, putting the responsibility back on simplifying the categories of weapons and hitting gangs hard. It's a pretty high threshold they provided in the policy, but basically if the police have a legitimate search warrant, and when they go there they find A, gang member or associate who's on their register, and B, they've got criminal activity like making drugs or money laundering and all that going on, and they also find that there is a firearm there that shouldn't be there for whatever reason, then they can instantly apply to the court's procedure of the asset. So I think it's quite a high threshold, but it's a good signal. And
that sounds like they are engaging in the follow the money type plan rather than
criminalise 250,000 fit and proper people who have been vetted.
That's right. And I think the other thing that the website does actually have is an alternative budget. I like it when parties do alternative budgets. It means that they've actually thought long and hard about how they will spend taxpayer money looking to the future. This is 31 pages long. It is really thorough, goes all through their policy initiatives. They've costed them all out. And this document's called Unleashing Our Potential. The other thing I'm really pleased to see is that this has been peer reviewed by economists. So it's not just let's pull some figures out of the air and attach them. They really have done a very thorough job of putting together this alternative budget. So overall, Simon, what do you think about this campaign?
Well, I'm impressed. I think this looks like a party that is ready to contest an election. And
perhaps to be part of a government.
Absolutely. They look like a potential government partner. It's well thought through and costed and checked and good on them. I mean, this is the best we've seen ACT produce probably since 2008.
People are saying that they're in the best shape they have been for last 17 years, and I tend to agree.
Yep.
All of that's available on the website. It's a very slick-looking website. It's been upgraded recently, I think. Very easy to navigate, so the information's all there and easy to find.
And they're on the road. Well, they were on the road.
That's right. They're in a bus. I'm not sure what lockdown means for that.
Well, if they're out of Auckland, probably
they'll be
okay until things change. But I was just thinking about the delicious coincidence of the New Zealand First bus and the ACT bus meeting in the high street of a town in Winston, and David Seymour getting out with their cheeks twitching and their hands going to the side. Okay. That's probably enough from us today. You can find all about TorquePoint, TORQUE, point.co.nz, and you can send in questions through the contacts page there. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie.
And I'm Heather Roy. Thanks for joining us on this VoterTorque podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.